Дорогие ребята, ну, у нас традиция, когда у вас это идет инаугурация, а у вас сегодня тоже инаугурация. Вот, у нашего нового президента инаугурация была ровно месяц назад, мы его можем поздравить, сегодня месяц его президентства, желать ему успехов. Но у вас сегодня инаугурация, вы сегодня, ну, там, будете получать там дипломы, в общем-то, вы победители, программы. И мы хотим вам каждый раз, ну, стараемся вам подарить такой импульс, такой интеллектуальный подарок. И мы стараемся всегда пригласить людей, которые могут вас вдохновить и сказать что-то, что вам запомнится и то, что пригодится в жизни. И мы следуем традиции этой. И сегодня вам какое-то послание сделает, какую-то правильную, интеллектуальную, эмоциональную, очень вдохновляющую инъекцию сделает один из самых больших интеллектуалов современности, который очень любит и очень знает хорошо Украину, который здесь бывает очень часто, но при этом он работает профессором в Ельском университете. Вот. И для меня это огромная честь представить этого человека, потому что я считаю, это один из самых таких умных, практикующих, активных интеллектуалов современности. Пожалуйста, встречайте. Тімоті Снайдер.
Окей, зараз розумію, що я маю говорити англійською мовою. В порядку, буду говорити англійською мовою, як хочете. В порядку, теж можу. Це взагалі не так тяжко. So, first of all, I want to say congratulations to you. Congratulations to you. This is your day. Congratulations on the scholarship. Congratulations on all that you have achieved. The second thing that I want to say is that I'm coming to you from a place where we also have scholarships. I'm coming to you from a place called Instytut Nauki pro Ludyny in Vienna, where we have a program called Ukraine in European Dialogue, where it's our idea to get people like you to circulate through Austria and to circulate through Ukraine. So if you think you might continue your studies, please talk to Dr. Kate Younger. Вона теж українською та російською мовами говорить. And we'd be happy to greet you in Vienna. I've been asked to say a few words about Europe and the future. This is very easy because Europe needs a future. The future is the one thing that Europe doesn't really have. And I tend to think that the future is something that Ukraine and Ukrainians can help Europe to find. In other words, I don't think the problem is just that Ukraine has to do all the right things to join the European Union. That's true. But the problem is also that Europe has to find a way into the 21st century. Europe needs young people with ideas about what a European future would look like. So let me try to be clearer about this. Europe has a past. Everyone knows that Europe has a past. Europe has a historical past that we're all familiar with. We're familiar with medieval history, we're familiar with the history of the Renaissance, the Reformation, the Age of Exploration, the Age of Revolutions. We're familiar with all of this, and especially we're familiar with this if we're Ukrainian, because all of the phases of European history every single one also take place here in Ukraine. Usually in a slightly more interesting form than in other places, but all of the phases of European history also take place here. Medieval history, Viking conquests, a Reformation, but with 3 rather than 2 major religions, an age of revolution, which actually brings a very strikingly violent revolution, an age of empire, and this is where things get very interesting, where Ukraine is exposed to the worst of imperial history in the 20th century. So when I say that Europe has a past, and when I say that Ukraine might be part of the answer to give Europe a future, this is part of what I have in mind. Ukraine is the last big question in European politics. It's the last big question to be answered. The essential European problem is, what do you do when empire is no longer possible? That is the big question in European history. The answer that Europeans have found for themselves is the European Union. That's the answer that Europeans have found. But that's an answer which has to keep being recreated over and over and over again. Because you're in Ukraine, you live in the place where the history of empire is the sharpest, the most depressing, and the most profound. You live in the place where Nazi versions of empire or Stalinist versions of empire had the greatest consequences. You also live in the place where creating a state after empire is extremely difficult, because the end of empire came late and empire lasted so long. So what this means is that Ukraine is essential for the mission of Europe. If what Europe is about is answering the question what to do after empire, then Ukraine is the last part of that answer. So you can think about this, if you want, in terms of exports and imports. Europe has things for export that Ukraine certainly needs. Above all, rules, right? The rule of law. Europe has far more rules than it really needs. It has far more attachment to rules than anyone can reasonably have. It's an exporter of rules. And that is good, because this country is a natural market for rules. When the Canadian ambassador nods, that means that you're right. Just so you know, right? Like, when your wife nods, that means she loves you. But when the Canadian ambassador nods, that means you're right. And if you're married to the Canadian ambassador, you're always right. Okay. Okay, where was I? So this country has a natural demand for rules. What Europe has for export are rules. And of course, Ukrainians understand this. So one part of the question is, how does Ukraine move close enough to Europe that Europe can export its rules to Ukraine, right? How do you build a rule of law state that's close enough, it doesn't have to be perfect, right? That's close enough to European standards that European standards can meet Ukraine somewhere in the middle. That's what Europe has for export. But what Europe has for import, the thing that Europe desperately needs, and the thing that people like you will provide, if anybody provides it, is a sense of the future. That's what Europe desperately needs. The entire European story is built on the past. The entire European story is about how bad things happened in the past, and now we've solved them with our nice project of unification. This is a very nice story. It has a problem, though, which is that nobody who's under 40 actually cares about it. It has another problem, which is that it doesn't tell you what to do in the future with all of this European power and all of this European achievement. The Europeans have created the biggest economy in the history of the world without an idea of what to do with it. They've created the biggest zone of contiguous democracies in the world without a clear idea of what to do with it. In other words, what Europe needs, what Europe has for import, is a future. And when I say future, I don't mean this in some kind of light way. The future is something that we all need, because without future, there's no democracy. Democracy depends upon an idea of the future. One sees this very clearly when one thinks about the problems of politics that Europeans and Americans. You might have heard that Americans are having some political problems. That might have reached you over here. The problems that Americans and Europeans are having have everything to do with the future. We've reached a point where some of our politicians try to recycle the past, right? Try to tell us that things were better in the past. And I have a simple answer to that. They weren't actually better in the past, right? And we've reached a point where other of our politicians are trying to tell us everything is okay the way that it is. I'll betray another big secret. That's also not true. Everything is not okay the way that it is. If you want to have a democracy, you have to have a story of the future. The democracy doesn't work without the future. If people don't think there's a future, then they won't vote. If politicians don't have an idea of how the future is going to look, there is no reason to vote for them. Democracy is a future-making machine. It creates a sense, when it works, it creates a sense of the future, and it depends upon a sense of the future. But this sense of the future has to be created somewhere. It has to come from somebody. Someone has to say things could be different. Someone has to say there are values or ethics according to which we will act to make things different. We are at a moment where Europe particularly needs this. The project of adding new members to the European Union gave Europe something like a future until 2014. 2014 is a very important turning point, because in 2014 we have a country, your country, Ukraine, where it's quite clear that most people would like to join the European project, and it becomes impossible for reasons having to do with another country, Russia. 2014 is the year when the European future basically stops. 2014 is the first time when a big country outside the European Union carries the flag of the European Union. That had never happened before. 2014 is the first time when people beyond the European Union said to the European Union, "You are our future, we have a future, we have things to offer." 2014 is also when the European future stopped. 2014 is when it became clear what the alternatives really are. The alternatives are more empire, go back to the past, or Europe, but a Europe with an imagination of the future. Now, I keep saying imagination of the future. And the thing that old people usually do to young people is they then close their speech by saying this. They say, "I have no idea what the future holds, but you're young, so figure it out." But I'm not going to do that. I mean, I do believe you're young and you should figure it out. And I do believe you should have ideas that I don't have and Victor doesn't have. Because if you don't have ideas that we don't have, right, then you're not very unpredictable, and you might as well, I mean, I don't want to say how old Victor is, but like I'm 49, right? So you might as well be 49. But I do want to close with a few ideas of how I think Ukraine does have a future for export, a few things that maybe are not so obvious. One of them is the digital world. There is no place on earth where information war is as intense as it is in this country, which means that there are a lot of people in this country who have thoughtful answers and deep experience with this question of the digital world. There is no way that democracy is going to survive unless we find a better, more sensible way to deal with the digital world. Ukraine could be a leader in this. Indeed, one might note just in passing that you're at a very interesting moment in your own history where we will try to discover if politicians who come from the digital world can turn into human beings, right? This seems like a very important question for all of us, and I say that perfectly seriously. A second thing that Ukraine could do for the future is Russian culture. Russian culture is not the same thing as the Russian Federation. You might have noticed that I'm speaking English. America doesn't have its own language, but we still matter. I mean, not as much as we used to, but when the United States became an independent country, the first thing it did was publish English dictionaries. Ukraine should publish Russian dictionaries. Ukraine should become a center of Russian culture. It's a mistake to leave it to the Russians. Why leave it to the Russians? We don't leave it to the British. Russian is the only international language which is codified in only one country. That's weird. German is different in Austria, Switzerland, and Germany. English is different in Australia, Britain, the United States. Why should the Russians get to define what Russian culture is? Why isn't there a Державний інститут російської мови і культури? Державний інститут російської мови і культури, which publishes Russian dictionaries, which standardizes the Russian language for use in Ukraine, and which projects Russian culture outwards into the world. Why not do that? Somebody has to take care of Russian culture, and your neighbor isn't necessarily doing the best job. So, why not you? Okay, you're applauding, and the clock says 0, so I think that is where I'm going to leave it. I'll be speaking to some of you for a little bit longer later on, but for now I just want to thank you for your attention. Thank you very much. Дуже дякую.
Друзі,